Welcome to Keep Hustling, where we are going past the why to get to the how. I'm your host, the always hustling Aaron Gordon, aka NY Risk Advisor, aka Mr. Keep Hustling. In this podcast, we will be diving deep into the professional and personal successes of our guests to find out how they hustled through the most difficult times in their life and their development to achieve the success they've gotten to today. So buckle up for what hopes to be an amazing ride. Let's get to it. I'm Aaron Gordon, NY Risk Advisor, your host and the guest of the pilot episode here of Keep Hustling. I want to begin with two important points. First and foremost, thank you. Thank you, listeners, for giving me your time. Thank you for trusting me to have these conversations. We, of course, always welcome your feedback, and I can't wait to see where this journey leads us. I have some ideas of the guests that you'll hear from. In the beginning will most likely be friends and family of mine and professional acquaintances who I've learned from over the course of my career and my lifetime, all 36 years of it, of course. But as this evolves, I'm sure that the questions will evolve, the content will evolve, and the learning opportunities will evolve. So I want to thank you from the beginning for trusting me with your time and trusting me to evolve this process to a place that can inspire us all to continually keep hustling. Second, this is my personal promise to you on this podcast. We will not shy away from having the difficult conversations. That doesn't mean that every episode will be heavy or difficult or challenging, but it does mean that when we speak to people and try to get past the why to the how and learn how successful individuals got to where they are personally and professionally by hustling and keep hustling even when times are difficult, that means that sometimes the conversations will be difficult as well. I'm sure we'll laugh. I'm almost certain we will cry. And I can't wait to see where this journey takes us. A little bit about me. Yes, I am NY Risk Advisor, and I am privileged to represent the second generation in my family's property and casualty insurance agency. You'll hear a lot about this over the course of the podcast because it really represents who I am. It's the only career I've ever known, except for a short stint at Cold Stone Creamery in my high school days. And so it really impacts my hustle every second of every day and every minute of every day. On that note, I am the proud father of 5 beautiful children, and I hope to be a great husband to my wife, Michelle. You'll hear about my family here as well. While I probably will not name my children personally, you will learn about them throughout the course of this conversation. Because if there are any 6 people who currently inspire my hustle the most, it's my wife and my children. You'll hear about my siblings, my identical twin brother, my older brothers, and my sister. The house that I grew up in has so much impact on me, which leads me to probably the most impactful 2 people that you'll hear about in almost every single episode. First and foremost, my father of blessed memory. See, I'm crying already. Growing up, my father was my superhero. And when I started my career at Gordon Companies, the company that he founded on December 2nd, 1968, yes, 55 years ago, I didn't realize the lasting impact that it would have on me every single second. And the emotions are still raw because after losing him earlier this year in April, I feel his presence and miss him every single day. In a similar vein, but a much happier one and more exciting one, I am privileged to work with my mother every single day. She inspires my hustle because I've watched her raise a family, run a household, and run an incredible business. And when I watch how she interacts with clients, personally, professionally, her children, her colleagues, and equally, or probably more important, her grandchildren, I am inspired to keep hustling to continue her legacy as much as I continue my father's. Very often, I remark or talk about or lament, just jokingly, that my office sat directly between my parents. My father's office was on the left and my mother's office is on the right. There is no greater privilege than I have than continuing their legacy. And I hope that this podcast will inspire you to find the legacy that you want to build and continue. I was born and raised in New York City, the core of the Big Apple. So the attitude and the funk and the spunk that comes through in this podcast will be all New York all the time. There was a period of time in my life when I tried to hide it, but you just can't escape New York. It has a lot to do with the hustle as well. Growing up in New York, I grew up in the city that never sleeps. I went to school here. I have only known a career that's based in Midtown Manhattan of New York City. The streets have the energy. The streets inspire the hustle. When you walk down Billionaires Row, Times Square, Grand Central, Wall Street, living through 9/11, all of these different things have inspired me and inspired my hustle, which will come through as we keep hustling together. I currently reside in Queens, New York, just a stone's throw away from Manhattan, and easily to get to all my business travel via LaGuardia Airport and JFK. I've become active on social media recently, and that over the last couple of years has been a new part of my hustle. You can catch me on any social media platform via the handle NY Risk Advisor. And earlier on in my career, I hid from that identity. I didn't think that being a trusted insurance advisor was something to be proud about. Or proud of, I should say. But then over the course of my short career so far, and one that I hope to last a really long time, I've realized that if you embrace your identity, that will help you keep hustling. You should also know that I'm an identical twin. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's worth repeating. So if you see me on the street or someone who looks like me and I don't say hello or I have no idea what you're talking about, it's probably my twin brother. I'm sure we'll hear from him on a later episode. In this podcast, we will answer 3 core questions, which I will get to shortly. But based on that, we will take the weekly conversations with our guests, and see where it takes us. As I mentioned, it's my goal on this podcast to make sure that we have the great conversations that will inspire you personally and professionally. And please, as I mentioned earlier on, do not be shy. Reach out to me. I will do my best to get back to you, and I hope that we can have open, honest, and engaging conversations that will continue to inspire people's hustle. If you're watching on video or you see any pictures of me, you will see that behind me, I have a periodic table element that shows hustle. And the most important thing about that picture that I leave behind me, so every single time I get in camera, every time I walk in and out of my office, I see is that it's 24/7, 365 days a year. We can't escape our hustle. That doesn't mean that people have to work 100-hour weeks or constantly have to be bogged down or stressed or running, but it means that everything that you do in your life impacts your hustle. And if you realize that and you embrace that, you can actually see greater success. And I'm sure that with our guests in the future, we'll get into that. And one of the things that I'm hoping we can get to is realizing that every person in whatever they've developed in their life as a work-life balance, those people will see and maybe we'll learn together and maybe we'll uncover things that they didn't even realize before has inspired their hustle. Because hustling doesn't mean running to exhaustion. Hustle, to me, means always putting your best foot forward and always growing. Hustling also must mean to me a constant evolution of the personal and professional self. And one of the reasons why I started this podcast, selfishly and candidly, is because I know and I hope that this will inspire my hustle. This will help me move forward, and this will help bring the great messages to the world. And so here are the 3 core questions that we'll be focusing on. First and foremost, what do we need to know about you, our guests, or me in this case, about your upbringing and professional development that brought us here today? For me, this boils down to the fact that, as I mentioned, I am the child of 2 of the greatest hustlers of all time. My father, of blessed memory, literally started as a messenger on the streets of New York, hustling insurance policies back and forth in Lower Manhattan. And he sent his last work email from a hospital bed a week before he passed away. That doesn't mean he didn't enjoy life. He had the greatest enjoyment. World's greatest wife, 5 incredible children, children-in-law, and 17 incredible grandchildren. But what it means is that he felt that he could do well by doing good. A quote that you will hear often, very often on this podcast, and I will get back to later. But for me, learning from my father meant that every single day you could grow. Every single day you could develop, and the world was really just a blank canvas of opportunity. We're in a business where any day clients can come in the door. Yes, it's true, clients can leave, but you can get the biggest client that you've ever dreamed of, a larger client than you could have even ever dreamed of in one single second. And the best way to get there, I learned from him, is to put your best foot forward and constantly be learning, evolving, and growing. The other thing you have to know about my upbringing is that my mother is a beast of a professional. And I say that with a smile on my face and in the greatest, most loving way. I watched my mother as I grew up raise my siblings and I, be there for us constantly, as my father was, but also run a business and run a business in the greatest possible way by putting clients first and foremost, and also never accepting mediocrity. This doesn't mean that life has to be difficult or that your career has to be difficult. But what it means is that you have to be the best version of yourself. And that's certainly something that I learned from my mother. Our second question that we will get into, I hope. What has been the most impactful or pivotal moment in your career to date? I've thought a lot about this question leading up to this episode. And the truth is, I hope that our guests don't talk about the singular greatest moment of revenue in their life. Because for me, while it's easy for me to say the biggest sale I've ever meant, the singular most impactful moment for me was when my father of blessed memory was going in for heart surgery a number of years ago. I was a young father in a young business with a dream of building a legacy and building family continuity in the trusted insurance advisory space. And in that moment, on the 5th floor of Weill Cornell Medical Center in New York City, I have a vivid memory of my father from his hospital bed handing me his cell phone. He had just gotten into smartphones then. Handing me his cell phone and saying, "Son, if this goes south, you have to sit in the big chair." That didn't mean that my mother wouldn't be there to help me. And that didn't mean that my mother still isn't here to help me every single day. But at that moment, I realized that my success was tied to my hustle. Thankfully, my father came out of that surgery and we had many more years of working together. But it was that moment when I realized that I had to focus on the bigger picture. I had to realize that there is no cap on my hustle and no cap on my ability to grow. It wasn't a sale. It didn't bring me a dollar or a cent to my name. The next day, many people would have forgotten about it. But when I think back to that moment, I realize that I guess philosophically or metaphorically grew 2 or 3 inches that day and realized that I could be successful if I kept hustling myself. And of course, if I continued the legacy in the way that my parents implanted in me. So for me, the most pivotal moment of my career was when my father handed me his cell phone that day. Parenthetically, there has probably been no happier moment professionally when I handed him that phone back. So, Dad, I miss you every day, as I said. Our third question or comment will be asking each guest to give us the motivational quote or the inspirational quote that drives them every single day. And obviously, these things can change over time. For me, mine has been, and I think always will be, although it's yet to be determined, my father's saying of doing well by doing good. As I mentioned earlier, this was really the mantra that my father lived by. And for me, growing up in a house with a father and a mother, for that matter, who always did well by doing good in their professional lives and their personal lives, was something that inspired me incredibly. Because in the end of the day, what I learned and what inspired my hustle was that you don't need to do illegal things, unethical things, or things that didn't feel right in order to get ahead. You could do very well still by doing good. People often ask who call for advice or who we help with their insurance and we don't necessarily get paid or we don't see a lot of revenue, how we do that, or how I'm willing to do that, or how my father was willing to do that, and how my mother is continually willing to do that. And I think it really boils down to the fact that we really believe and honestly believe that we will do well and the best by doing good. And if you do well by doing good, that takes away a lot of doubt in your life. Because when you put your head on the pillow at night, as my father of blessed memory used to say, then you'll be able to look yourself in the mirror, or I guess the next morning, look yourself in the mirror and say that you put your best foot forward and you did good. And if you do good, then you're almost guaranteed to do well. That doesn't mean you'll be the richest person in the world. That doesn't mean you'll be the most successful person in your industry, on your block, or anywhere where you might be. But what it does mean is that you'll have incredible fulfillment, hopefully financial stability, and you'll build a career, a life, and a legacy that you will be proud of and you can pass on to the next generation. As I said, I know that this is going to be a crazy journey. I know that there'll be more about me that you'll learn. I know that there'll be more questions, and sometimes we'll have more questions than answers. But at the end of the day, there's only one goal of this podcast, and that's to inspire us all to keep hustling and keep going. That's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see what this brings. Remember, most importantly, keep hustling for yourself, for your family, and for your ongoing legacy. All right, hustlers, that brings us to the end of another fantastic episode. Thank you for listening. The listeners are the most important part of this show. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us reach more listeners. Plus, be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. We have some amazing guests and topics lined up for you, and we don't want you to miss out. And finally, if you have any suggestions, comments, or even just want to say hello, please feel free to reach out to us on all social media platforms. We are Keep Hustling Pod on Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We would love to hear from you to continue the conversation. Thanks again for tuning in and supporting our podcast. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Until next time, stay curious, stay hungry, and keep hustling.